please start with that?
Yeah, Mike Williams, Jacksonville, Duval County.
Billy Woods, Marion County.
Bob Gualtieri, Pinellas County.
Peyton Grinnell, Lake County.
Gator Deloach, Putnam County.
Michelle Cook, Clay County.
Brad Whitehead, Union County.
Gordon Smith, Bradford County. Crossroads too late. Doing what the federal government can't do, keep it you safe. Remember, there's no more sleep so y'all can.
Too many cups
coming already. Oh, shit, I ain't.
They could do a bit of a second row if you need it.
Yeah, there you go.
You know what,
I'm trying to find a spot where she doesn't.
Another one, he's right. He ain't that before you saw it.
the senator will be here in about 2 minutes.
Excuse me? I have a response to that, but not now.
Yeah, I know.
It's almost as pretty as Bradford County, isn't it? Not quite, but it's pretty. Now, what are you looking at when you look at
Sure you
that?
want to stand in front of me
Huh?
and Bob?
No.
6'2".
Pretty view, eh?
Well,
Pretty to me.
that way we're
Me
not.
too. But it is good sometimes to travel.
Good to see you.
Live the way that most people want to live. Yeah, that's right, that's right. It's nice. They usually jealous of it.
No.
Room full of politicians.
Cameras are rolling.
You got an artist when they could talk, right?
Gordon run out of quotes.
Anytime you got an artist. I get started now.
You're just gonna be right here, sir. Good morning, everybody. This morning, I am honored to stand here along with other sheriffs from across the state of Florida with Senator Marco Rubio as we proudly endorse him for re-election to the United States Senate. The sheriffs standing here this morning are just a handful of the 55 Florida sheriffs who are endorsing and standing with Marco, as he has always stood with us, our deputies, and our profession. The other candidate in this race, however, Val Demings, turned her back on her profession as she stood with the soft on crime crowd in Washington, D.C., and in doing so, put our citizens and our law enforcement officers at risk. For someone who claims to have been a cop and to have worn the badge, what she did in Washington, D.C. to support criminals forever tarnished any badge she ever wore, and sadly, she did it to further her own political career. That's why the overwhelming majority of Florida sheriffs are standing with Marco, who not only didn't turn his back on us, but who stood shoulder to shoulder with us to help stop illegal immigration, reduce violent crime in our country, and to stop drug trafficking into our communities. I'm proud to stand with Marco, and so are Florida's top law enforcement leaders, who know he won't forget us when he gets back to Washington, D.C. because of partisan politics. At this time, I'm going to ask Clay County Sheriff Michelle Cook to come to the podium and share a few words.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Cook, and I have the privilege of serving as the Sheriff of Clay County here in Florida. As a constitutionally elected sheriff, my obligation is to the law and to the great people of the county in which I serve. Having grown up in this community, I understand this community. Sadly, there are many politicians who do not grasp the concept that law enforcement can be tough on crime while still maintaining community trust. I am so grateful that Senator Rubio recognizes that enforcing the law and serving the community are not mutually exclusive. It seems that each time we turn on the news, another law enforcement officer has been killed while serving the public. Daily, our finest men and women don their gear, pin on their badge that identifies them as a protector of the citizen, and say goodbye to their families as they go out and serve. All too often, an officer never returns to their family, killed in a senseless act of violence, often by a career criminal. This trend is unacceptable. The rhetoric coming from some of our leaders in Washington is fueling anti-cop sentiment, but Senator Rubio has consistently advocated for professional law enforcement and has worked with us to make our communities safer. He understands that violent career criminals must be held accountable and that we must enhance penalties for those convicted of killing or targeting America's front line, the police officer. Senator Rubio has remained a steadfast champion for law enforcement while others have swayed in whatever direction the political winds are blowing. Thank you, Senator Rubio, for standing with law enforcement as we stand with our citizens.
Folks, as I said, this is just a handful of the 55 sheriffs that have already endorsed Senator Rubio. And the reason for that is, as Sheriff Cook said, he has stood with us. He has been unwavering in his support of law enforcement. He knows that law enforcement is who's coming when 911's called, and he knows that law enforcement is who's protecting him and his family and you and your family each and every day. So with that, I'd like to bring to the podium and thank for his support as we endorse Senator Marco Rubio.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate it. Thank you all. I'm deeply honored by this. I anticipate that I have in the past and will again in the future receive many endorsements, but few will matter, if any, will matter as much as this one does to me. I'm a lawmaker, which means we pass laws, but then someone has to go out and enforce these laws. Someone has to go out and be the face of these laws and make them apply in the real world. And so to me, it's always ironic when the people who pass these laws and do the press conferences then go home and criticize the people that are out there trying to enforce the laws they passed. And what happens when you don't enforce laws? Whether it is we stop arresting people, we undermine the people doing the arresting, or prosecutors decide I'm no longer going to take to trial people who break certain laws. When that happens, you inject the spirit of unlawfulness. You inject the spirit of lawlessness into a society. And so sadly, I don't think anyone should be surprised at the sad news that came out late last week. We have the highest murder rate in a quarter century. Nor should we be surprised, unfortunately and tragically, to learn that over the last year there's been a dramatic, and I mean dramatic, 40-some-odd% increase in the number of attacks against police officers and sheriff's deputies. And I'm not just talking about shootouts at a traffic stop with someone that's wanted on a warrant. I'm talking about ambushes. I'm talking about efforts organized to ambush law enforcement. Because when you inject the spirit of lawlessness in a culture and a society, you embolden the lawless. And in the end, the men and women standing behind me and the men and women that work for them are the ones that have to respond to it at a very difficult job. And so I think it's especially sickening when people who should know better, like Chuck Schumer's hand-picked candidate for U.S. Senate, Val Demings, she should know better. It's even worse when someone who knows better and should know better decides to align themselves with this effort to call into question the work that law enforcement is doing. And they should know better than, for example, the way she has voted for not deporting criminal aliens that are in this country. Not only are they here illegally, but now they've violated the laws, they've committed crimes, and she opposes them being deported after committing crimes. It's inexplicable. And so whether it's a border that's completely uncontrolled, today we are perhaps the only country in the Western Hemisphere, and maybe the world, where you can just walk across the border, declare yourself here unannounced illegally, and you're released into the general population pending a hearing you'll never show up for. We're perhaps the only country in the world at this point, that I know of anyways, that has cities and jurisdictions that have basically said, we don't care what laws you passed, we are going to decriminalize theft under a certain amount of money. But what do you think is going to happen when you tell people, we won't arrest you if you do something? They're going to do it. So we have this epidemic of smash and grabs around the country. And not to mention the violence that we've now seen, not just against law enforcement, but against one another. These brutal attacks that we see. Now I'll admit, we're blessed to live in a state that's doing better than most in that regard. Because at least here, we still don't have a governor or a legislature, thank God, that's gone completely crazy. And we still have prosecutors that for the most part will prosecute the law. But there are plenty of people around this country that would love to see Florida become like California or New York or some of these other places that have lost their mind and become deranged. And I can tell you that as long as I'm in the U.S. Senate, I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. And I'll work alongside these men and women behind me and the men and women that serve under them to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm honored by this endorsement. This speaks to more than just politics. It speaks to the direction of our country. And I think this is a direction that is incredibly important and badly needed, and that's why I'm so grateful to be with all of them here today, and I'm eternally grateful for your support, and you can continue to always count on mine.
Again, sir, we are honored to stand with you, and we appreciate you always standing with us. At this time, I'd like to bring Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd to the lectern.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to be a sheriff in Polk County, Florida. It's my honor to be a sheriff across the state of Florida, and the reason is because we have a senator such as Marco Rubio. You see, I knew Marco long before he was U.S. Senator, and he's not changed, and that's important. I'm the past president of Major County Sheriffs of America. I and Sheriff Gualtieri worked tirelessly to help stop legislation that was passed by the U.S. House. Legislation that would have made it easier for the federal government to prosecute cops who are just doing their jobs. Legislation that would have put immense billions upon billions of taxpayer cost on local communities over lawsuits filed against law enforcement officers. We have a system in place that holds law enforcement officers accountable, and it does a very good job. We have a civil process system in place that holds law enforcement officers accountable. But what I saw was the U.S. House of Representatives, and Val Demings voted for that, to defund the police, to cost the taxpayers more money, to make it easier to prosecute the police that are putting their life on the line in Orlando, Florida, and across this United States of America. I'll call Senator Rubio during this communication, and the senator said, "Sheriff, I've not changed. I'm with you. We're not going to let that pass. We're going to fight against it. We're going to hold law enforcement officers accountable when they violate the law, when they're wrong." And I totally agree with that, and I do. And history shows that if you go back and look in the record. But we're going to support them when they're out there in the community keeping us all safe. Now I ask you, I want you to look around the nation. Portland, Oregon. Seattle, Washington. Baltimore, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Wisconsin. You didn't see peaceful protest when they were burning buildings and smashing cars and injuring people. What you saw was lawlessness. Now, quite frankly, the reason those things occur in those communities are because of the rule makers. They allow that. It's because of the community. They allow that. Senator Rubio in this state has said no. We're going to look out for and ensure that peaceful protests are not only allowed but encouraged. But we're going to make sure that everyone is safe. When you look around the state of Florida today, in my county alone in the last 2 years, 48,000 people have moved into the county. Why are they coming to Florida? Because we're safe. Because it's a place to be. Who wants to live in Portland so when you go to bed at night, you don't know if your car's going to be there the next day, or if your windows are going to be smashed, or if they're going to set the house on fire? There's real fear in those places. In the state of Florida, when you go to bed at night, you think about, do I go to Disney or the beaches? We've got a U.S. Senator that's simply the very best for Florida. It's Marco Rubio. And Senator, I want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I have seen that you've not changed, that you've been steadfast in looking out for the interest, protecting the entire state of Florida and all the people. And you've made sure that we've had the tools and the resources to do that. God bless you. We appreciate you so much.
Sheriff, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all, Senator. If you just want to step up, we'll take a little bit for some quick questions.
Senator Rubio, if you could, what's sort of your message to voters when they do decide either, Rubio or Demings come November of 2022? I mean, what's really at stake, especially here in Florida, based on that decision when it comes to public safety?
Well, two things are at stake in general. The first is, I'd point to the last 5 years I've been in the Senate, and I'd say I've achieved more in those 5 years than anybody who's ever served in the U.S. Senate from the state of Florida. The Veteran Accountability Act, both of them, one of the first laws signed by President Trump was my bill. The Paycheck Protection Program that I wrote, named, passed, and helped implement saved millions of small businesses in this country and tens of millions of small business jobs. Both of the laws this country's passed to deal with Hong Kong were my bills. Both of the laws this country's passed to deal with human rights violations, the genocide being committed by the Chinese government, were mine. When Florida got hit by natural disasters, it was me who stepped forward and convinced President Trump, not once but twice, to fully fund our disaster response. My constituent service office received an award as the best constituent service operation in the entire Congress. The University of Virginia Vanderbilt Center for Effective Lawmaking ranked me the most effective Republican in the entire Senate. YouGov, another nonpartisan entity, ranked me the #2 overall in leadership in the United States Senate. So I'm very proud of my record. I'm excited to talk about it. A lot of people haven't heard about it and widely reported, but it's real, and I can't wait to talk about it. What's at stake with law and order is what's at stake broadly. When you talk about these Senate races, it isn't just about who you're electing to the Senate. It's whose lead will they follow when they get to Washington. Chuck Schumer, frankly, is one vote away. He just needs one. If I were not in this position and one of my opponents, like Val Demings, was, you'd never heard the name Joe Manchin. You never would have heard the name Kristen Sinema. Because Chuck Schumer would have 51 votes, and with those 51 votes, he could pass anything he wants, which includes codifying socialism in our laws through what they called Build Back Better. I call it Build Back Socialist. By codifying into law the changes that we've talked about here today, where police officers across this country and law enforcement officials would be getting sued in court. So every time they're out there responding to a call, two things are on their mind. Am I going to make it? Am I going to live? And am I going to get sued afterwards? And I have to make that decision in a millisecond. So that would become the law of this country. We would basically have a country that codified open borders, where you can come here illegally and stay without any consequence. And the list goes on, the parade of horribles goes on and on. So in the end, the reason why Chuck Schumer wants Val Demings is because she's voted with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time in the House. 100% of the time. So if you want Nancy Pelosi to be your next U.S. Senator, you have a candidate running, that's perfect. But I think most people don't want that here in this state. And that's why he picked her, because she voted with him. She voted with Pelosi 100% of the time. He's counting on her voting with him 100% of the time. And that will dramatically change not just our country, but our federal government in ways that might be irreversible.
Senator,
yes, sir.
I have a quote first before the question. I get it. People are frustrated with the direction of our country. That leaders cannot say whatever they want because words have consequences.
Yes.
They lead to actions that others take. Do you still feel that way about the former president after what happened in the Capitol last year?
I still feel that way about our current leaders whose words have consequences. When you go out telling people, look, I get it, you burned down a building, I know you're frustrated, and you treat that differently from some other type of rioting or looting, you're encouraging it. People hear that and decide, you know what, I'm in a country where it's okay to do that kind of thing. I condemn it across the board. I don't care if you're storming the Capitol because you don't like the way the election turned out, or you're burning down a small business. Those are crimes, they should be prosecuted.
I'm referring to a former president.
I don't know why that...
Do you still stand by those words you quoted 6 years ago?
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to relitigate I think President Trump achieved a lot of things that benefited this country. Did I always agree with everything he said? No, of course not, because I don't agree with anyone 100% of the time. In my own family, people don't agree with me 100% of the time. That's a silly standard to apply. What I can tell you the right standard is, as leaders, when you go out and encourage law breaking, you're going to get law breaking. And I believe President Trump, when he was President of the United States, we didn't have the murder rate we have now. We didn't have the assaults on law enforcement that we see now. I think he was a better president than Joe Biden.
All right, last question. Good? All right,
All right,
thanks,
thank you guys.